Got ruined. What's up, everybody? Let YouTube do its thing, catch up, let people know, blah, 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 all the usuals. Happy Tuesday. Oh, man. It's been a week. It's gonna be a very busy week, actually. Let's see. What can I go over before we get on to topic that isn't too spoilery now? Um, I'm gonna be heading out to see my mom probably this weekend. Depends on. I'm kind of watching some weather just in case because I got to go through two different mountain passes to go to my mom's place. She lives on the other side. Well, I mean, not truly the other side of the state, but kind of the other side of the state in the grand scheme of things. It's like 3.5 hours of driving. Plus, I'm an electric, so you got to add about an extra hour in there because I got to charge about halfway through. But yeah, supposed to be going out that way for a day before the weather gets super snowy and horrible out there. So she lives out on the eastern side of the state where they actually get a decent amount of snow, but it's more the mountain passes that get the snow. And since I have to go through two different passes, it just becomes really tricky once you get really into like about middle October. It gets very hard to get over there reasonably safely. Now, fortunately, I have a pretty safe vehicle, but still, it's one of those things where better safe than sorry. So it's kind of my last dash. I basically have to go through like a 4 hour long training at work, and as soon as that is done, I like I log out of work and get rolling. So I have 8 a.m. to noon, all training at work, and then I get headed off and go out to my mom's place. I know, so exciting. Is that my? It is my water ball. I was trying to figure out what was in the corner of my screen. Leo 29 Aquatics, a dosing question for water column and root feeders. What's the best way to do it correctly in a tank with planted substrate? Also, best way to add CO2. Okay. So I'll answer that question shortly, and then we'll get into topic. But so, best way to add CO2 slowly. I would use a pressurized system. It depends on the size of your tank as to whether or not you want to use a number of different methods to add the CO2 to your water. So whether you use like an inline reactor, whether you only need like a one of those little nano diffusers, or whether you want to go more like an atomic diffuser route, whether you need like a full-on reactor. That's usually for like very large tanks. You're getting over 100 gallons. You might look at a reactor if you have a sump, but if you have a canister filter, you'd look at an inline. If you're using a canister filter, inlines are awesome, just period, almost no matter what size your tank is. But what I would do is, depending on the size of your tank, I would start at like 1 or 2 bubbles a second for a week or two, and then just slowly crank it up to whatever you're going to go to. There's so many factors in this. Like me personally, I like going very low on my CO2. I don't like pushing it very high. I like just enough to give me that little boost in density, in color, just a touch of extra growth, but not so much that I'm trimming like every other week. So, my example is a 40-gallon breeder. I'll do 2 bubbles a second. My 140-gallon guppy mansion was at 3 bubbles a second. So I really was not putting very much CO2 into that at all. It was just enough to boost it a little bit. And that's all I personally am looking for. I don't want something crazy. But it depends on what you're after. As far as dosing, if you have a really good substrate, you can do basically only water column feeding fertilizer, because the substrate's going to suck up some of that. But realistically, what I would say is, you put your root tabs in probably about once a month or so, depending on how heavy the root feeding plants are in your tank. If you have a bunch of swords and they're getting big, you might have to do like a root tab under the sword every 2 weeks. You might need to do like 6 root tabs a month. Who knows? But if you have only a little section of plants that are big root feeders, like maybe you got a section of crypts and everything else is more water column feeders, you really only need root tabs in the area where the root feeders are. And then you can just normally dose your water column feeding. The thing is, if your substrate's deep enough, you're not going to get any of the nutrients really up into the water column. I put this in big quotation marks. This is just the easiest way to think about it. From a root tab, usually there's some level of mixture of mineralized dirt or clay with their nutrients, and they're a powder, and they kind of very slowly sit there and get absorbed. And it's more that they're present in the substrate so that the CEC capacity of your substrate can absorb a lot of those and make them available. There's actually a much larger super sciencey version of this that explains like bacterial interactions and all this kind of stuff of how those nutrients get absorbed. We're going to ignore that. That's way more information than we actually need. The simple part is usually about once a month in the substrate, liquid fertilizer up in the water column, you'll be fine. Yeah, Brightwell or Fluval Stratum, ADA Amazonia, UNS Contra Soil, Tropica, all those are fairly high CEC capacity, and they're all going to do very well at absorbing some level of nutrients out of the water column. Now, really what we want is if you have a good deep substrate, say you were like 4 or 5 inches worth, maybe more, that's where you really want root tabs, because you're trying to get them very deep down in the area where the water flow is very minimal, right? Because if there's minimal water flow, you're probably not getting much of those liquid fertilizers down into that portion of your substrate. So we're trying to get those ferts deep in the substrate so that those really robust root systems that grow really big have plenty of fuel. Hope that helps. Barbara, follow-up. I'll keep this one before we get on topic. Do you need to add root tabs with planted substrates like Rio or Sciro or Stratum? I think I kind of half answered that. Need to? No. Not necessarily. However, if you have fairly deep substrate, or you have plants that have very, very heavy root systems that they build, typically this is most of your swords and some of your Aponogetans, then it's advisable to add some root tabs specifically for those plants, and you want to get them as deep as you can because you're trying to encourage those root systems to build deep instead of broad. If they start building broad, they compete with other plants in the tank, but if they build deep to get their nutrients, they're really only competing with their own capability to absorb the nutrients that you give them. They will eventually, over time, span out, especially swords. Amazon swords do this like crazy, but you can, in a way, quotation marks around this because it's not training it, but you can kind of force the plant to go in one direction to seek out its nutrients. I hope that makes some sense. It's not perfect, but it does work. Richie Collins, welcome to Suda McGill. Thank you very much for becoming a member. Let's get on topic for a sec. Okay, so we're like a week and a half away from Fishtober Fest. It is October 8th and 9th in Portland, Oregon, if you will. So not very far from my beloved Seattle home. If you're on the West Coast, especially the Northwest, you're able to make it. It's free. There's no attendance fee. You can literally just show up and hang out. There's a number of awesome speakers. Chris Biggs is going to be there all the way from Central Canada. That hilarious Disturbed Canadian is going to be joining us, which I think will be a blast. I can't wait to see what he has to talk about. Pam Chim. I said Chim, but it's Chin. My English, no so good. It's just like, when you talk a lot, I had a lot of meetings yesterday and today. I have a lot of meetings tomorrow too, actually. I have a lot of meetings in my job. But when you talk too much in those things, your ability to enunciate just goes right out the window. Anyway, Pam Chin, who's like legendary. I mean, I would argue that's the right word when it comes to cichlids, is going to be there. She has a talk. There's also, man, I just asked Kenny about this. I think it's Carolyn, I believe is her name. But she runs the cichlid auctions, the bitch auctions, babes in the cichlid hobby, which I think that is like the most hilarious name, by the way. But she's a hoot too. She's going to be there. Alex from Secret History will be there. For some reason, they invited me to talk, and I'm not really sure why. No. So let's talk about a couple of things. What's going on? I'm taking certain things with me. First preview for you lovely folks. Lovely folks. I'm making some fish towels, and I got some preview stitching back, and I want to show them off. Yeah? What do you think? So there was 2 color options. Even though this art is supposed to be Danger Noodle, and I didn't want to, because I have a tight timeline, and the particular embroidery house I'm working with is very busy. I didn't have time to kind of like merge the colors, if you will. So I kind of had to pick one of the 2 colors, and then they mentioned to ignore some of the stitch outs because they didn't go that great as a preview, but you can kind of see like the font and what that's going to look like. I went with the more orange looking one because the rest of Team Thick is very orange, almost that like super red kind of color that we see in some plecos. So I went with that coloration, which is this guy here, not the more pink one, which is this guy over here. So that's going to be on a nice black fish room towel. Yeah, kind of similar actually in design. I'm going to grab this one that I have here for myself. Although Carrie's is printed for Science Gal Aquatics, but it's like this style of terry cloth towel, right? So it's got the style. Only difference is you're going to have the Danger Noodle art for Fishtober Fest. I'm actually going to have a surprising number of those with me. So like we did with the hats at Triple Crown, there will be a certain number of them that are limited, individually numbered. So if you're a member and you're at Fishtober Fest, come yell at me and you get a free towel. Pretty cool, right? That's the way this psycho does things. And then I should have some spare towels when it's all said and done. And we'll do some giveaways of towels. I still have to do the hats. I have to like go remember how many I have. I pledged one to somebody who was supposed to be at Triple Crown and couldn't make it due to illness. So, you know, doing the right thing for people. So I said, I'll ship you one. My treat. So I have to discount that hat out of what few I have left. I think I'm going to have, it's either 2 or 3 to give away. I have to recheck my count because I haven't looked with when I got sick and all those things. I just haven't looked since that box got here since the first time. So I have to go recount. Yeah. People bugging me about hats. Don't worry. Hats will do their thing, but I have to ship those out. Let's see here. The other thing I want to where do I got this thing? So I want to talk about my talk briefly, very, very briefly. There's kind of a theme with the towel, and you guys will get a little spoiler. Now, granted, I'm going to record it. It's going to come up on the channel. Don't worry, you guys will get to watch it in full. The only difference is you won't be there live to ask questions if you're just watching the replay of it, but I'm hoping to do something a little more fun. Normally, I'm known for plants and rainbow fish. This is a preview of the thing that I'm finishing up. This is the title that's not quite done. Notice the theme? Meh? What do you think, chat? I want to know from you folks that are here live. Initial thoughts. How I fell in love with a fish that farts. Yeah, and totally. Comment crew can Q&A all the time. Maybe we'll do like a follow-up that's just answering questions or something like that from comments on the talk itself. Totally open to doing those kind of things. But yeah. So I wanted to do something a little fun and silly, a little homage to Danger Noodle and Team Thick, just because there's some, they really are something that is fun. And yeah, you know, I wanted to have a little fun with it. I wanted to do something silly because I think what I was initially told, that might be different now because it's a 2-day convention instead of just one like it was last year. But initially when we were talking about talks, it was like, you know, shoot for like half an hour. I'm like, cool, I can do a half an hour silly thing, but also give some basic information on fish that fart. But yeah. Oh, farting fish screensaver. I have to... It's it's so tough to catch them like on camera in focus. In the most recent video, right, you can actually see one in the background just like let off quite the air curtain. I think it's like in the 6.5 minute mark or something in the video that was out Saturday. But like you just look over my shoulder and there's just and somebody got in the comments. I went back and I watched it. I was laughing because it's so hard for me to catch that on camera, and then there it is, perfect in the background, a little bit blurry, but you can't miss it. Even though it's blurry, you see just this cloud of bubbles come up from this loach that's like hanging its butt up in the air. It's hysterical. That's part of why I've fallen in love with those weird dumb noodles. It's just because they're such silly and interesting characters, much more than I would have ever thought, like having seen them in a store or something like that, right? And yeah, so I'm going to tell parts of that story. Let's see here. Yeah. So that's other things in Fishtober Fest. Let me see. What else? Is there anything else that's like really interesting? There's going to be kind of a big vendor room. And it's 2 days this go around, so there will be a lot more time. Oh, I am bringing a bunch of plants with me too. So I want to bring a bunch of Java Fern, probably some Bulbitis. It'd be 2 different types of Java Fern, because I have a lot of Java Fern to thin out of some of my tanks. And we'll probably bring some more Crypt Jacobsonite Pink. I think I have enough. I might have a small stock of Crypt Florida Sunset to bring with me. My main Florida Sunset, like, I used to have this really big amount of it in my Guppy Mansion, but we had a big heat wave when I went to Triple Crown out in Kentucky, and a ton of my crypts in the Guppy Mansion melted back. So they were way denser than they are right now. So I have to regrow them. I was planning on taking a bunch of like these 2 crypts that are in there with me, and now it's like, nope, I have to regrow them all. But I do have some in the Redding River tank along with the Jacobsonite Pink, so I'll probably bring that. And then I also have some Crypt Ponderdidifolia that I'm going to bring with me. That's kind of rare, not exactly easy to find, but not impossible to find. If you look a bunch, you can find it. So yeah, I'm going to bring some plants. I won't bring any fish. Sorry, gang. If you're hoping for fish, that's not happening. However, I know that Daniken Aquatics is going to have a small army of my guppies available for sale there. So if you are looking for guppies, you can get them from them, because they got them from me. So they're one of the backup clans of the Blue Hawaiian Moscow that are out there. I need all the crypts for my scape. Well, Stephen P., you come say hi. I'll give you a couple fun toys to take home. But yeah. Yeah, totally. I understand for folks that like it's a full day drive and you got school or stuff like that. We totally get those kind of things. But if you can make it, please come say hi. Please come say hi. I'm basically just gonna be hanging out. I'll film some, but mostly just I love doing those things purely for a social thing. I love just hanging out with fish nerds and babbling. And I've already caught my human malware dose, so should be fine this go around, right? I swear to God, if I get sick again, it's gonna be a nightmare. All right, we'll go into question and answers. That's kind of everything for Fishtober Fest, other than just like there's a lot of great people speaking. There's gonna be a ton of vendors down there. I know Steenfot Aquatics is gonna have a booth. I'm probably gonna spend a lot of time hanging out with Bob. A number of awesome folks will have booths down there, whether it's local fish breeders. There's a couple of local fish stores that are smaller, that are really cool people that will have booths there. So it should be a lot of fun. It should be a lot of fun. Just kind of hang out. Very much a like fish nerd convention, and not necessarily like your Aquashellas where they're a little bit more on the spectacle side of things. It's more just like kind of like Triple Crown, where it's a lot of nerds hanging out, being nerds. But because it's small, if you can't make it, good opportunity to sit down and BS with folks that you like talking to. The Paul Soltero. If you'd have brought the crypts to Louisville, they wouldn't have melted. I don't know, man. I don't know. Uh, Leo 2 and 9 Aquatics, did you ever find out who sells running rivers? So I do know one source for running rivers, which it's whether you buy it direct from him or through Dan's Fish, they come from the same person. It's just that if you buy them from Dan, they've been quarantined a little extra and they're shipped a little bit better. But I mean, the difference is like pretty small in the grand scheme of things. But for those where you probably actually would save on some shipping through Dan, but it might be slightly more expensive per fish. It'd probably end up being the same. But Roseline 17 on Aquabid, that's Marcel W. And then he sells them pretty regularly to Dan when he has a good group. It's basically when he builds up enough of them in size, he sends them over. I want to get a couple earlier questions, and then I'll catch up to chat. I see a good one from like Legion Aquatics, but yeah. How often does Dan get them? You know, I'm not really sure. This is where I need like I need Dan or Johnny in chat. I know they have a big order of fish coming in fairly soon, and if that is something where it's coming in from Marcel specifically, then I would assume running rivers are on the list because he's been breeding them really regularly. There's Johnny. Rads and the Sea Centenniensis came from Marcel. Yeah, I mean, I could literally look at your list and tell you every fish that Marcel breeds. I know Marcel's list. I know Marcel's list very well, but yeah. No, I mean, you guys get a lot of really great. Marcel's like one of the best breeders out there. And I think the bigger thing is if you're trying to buy fish in quantity, like you want to buy 12 to 15 of them, you might actually be better off ordering through Dan directly just because of the way that Dan ships things. There's just so much care and attention, especially if you're a longer distance. Because Marcel's in, I think it's like Wisconsin. So if you're say you're in like California, or maybe you're all the way up in the Northeast, down in Florida, where there's a decent distance, you might be better off with going to Dan directly because of the way that he packages and ships stuff. Well, I guess now it's the crew that does stuff, but it's all Dan's method, right? So I'm just going to assume we're going to go he, but it's the royal he. I'm being weird. Don't mind me. But yeah. That's what I would be looking at in regards to there. But you know, if you can get them from Marcel when he has them up for sale on like Aquabid, you're probably paying relatively similar price after you account for shipping and all those things. The only difference is they haven't gone through Dan's hands and quarantine and go through a slightly different ship process. But to be fair, I've ordered fish from Marcel before, and he ships very well, and I've never had a loss in shipping with him. So yeah, take that how you will. I think you're just more likely to regularly get fish through Dan, especially if you go to like, you know, Dan or Johnny or somebody, be like, hey, the next time you have a chance to order this fish, I'd really like them because I'm really looking out for them. You might be more likely to kind of sway them a little bit on their list or what they order. Who knows? Okay, earlier question. Sorry, we went really deep on running rivers. It's like I love them a ton or something. Make sure I'm not missing something. Okay. Speaking of danger, what's the highest temp that they can handle? Handle versus sustained are very different. So they can take up to about 82, but realistically, I would say if you're going to keep them at a consistent temperature, I would try to not go above about 76. Can they handle 78 to 80? Yes, but it will reduce their lifespan. They can live 7 to 10 years, but if you push the temperature higher, it's going to speed up their metabolism. They're going to grow faster. They're also going to live a shorter life. So, you got to keep in mind the weather loach, the doja loach, the pond loach, they all three same name, right? They're nicknames for the same fish. They live in climates where often their common temperature is 68 to 72, kind of in that range, right? So a cool but warm water fish. Now, they do fine in slightly warmer temps, but there is some risk, but not necessarily big risk, if that makes sense. I swear there was another question I missed somewhere that I really wanted to answer. Hold on. I gotta dig deep into chat. Aha. Bird Guy Reef. Just starting with CO2 on a 90-gallon with sump. Lighting is 2 Flue Ball 3.0s. When should I think about increasing lighting? Is there a best way to go about it? Good question. So what I would say is start your CO2 and start low. 90-gallon, I would say start at like, assuming you haven't started it yet, but it sounds like you have started it. I would start at something like 2 to 3 bubbles a second. And then what I would do is let that happen for 3 to 4 days, maybe a week. And then I would increase my lighting a little bit. It really depends on the plants you're keeping. If you're keeping mostly low to medium light plants that don't really need strong light, you don't need to increase a ton. You just keep your CO2 level low. It'll make your CO2 last a lot longer, but it'll give you a little extra density in their growth, and you might need a little extra nutrients because you're pushing CO2. However, if you're trying to get some more aggressive growing plants, or maybe you like have some of the really cool rotalas that have some really interesting color to them, then you might need higher levels of CO2, and in a 90-gallon, you might need to go to like 5 or 6 bubbles a second. And I understand that can be very hard to visibly see, but you'll get a feel for it when you're messing with the little valve there. And then at that point, you'll start pushing toward probably 100% light. Maybe not on blue, but 100% on all your whites at least, with a Fluval 3. Because you've got a relatively deep tank in a 90-gallon, and you're pushing CO2, so they can handle a bit more. But in the end, it's just figure out what your plants need and account for your CO2. If you're trying to keep your CO2 low and slow like I like to do it, you probably don't need to push a whole ton of light. You can push more, but you probably don't need to push a ton. You might be fine with like 75 on each light, right? And that might be more than enough for what you're doing. It really depends on the plants you're using. If you're doing like Anubias and Java Fir and a lot of these lower demand plants, if you push the light too high, you're going to start getting algae on them, and then it's going to become a nightmare, right? So it's all about just balancing things out, slowly adjust and monitor. I would test things for at least a week when you make adjustments. So let's say your light starts at 60% each, and you're like, okay, I started my CO2, now I want to go to like 75% each. Do that for like 2 weeks. Don't mess with anything else and watch what happens. Let your tank tell you if it is happy or if it needs more or if you've put up too much. Start seeing way too much algae, you might be too bright on your lights. Or it's very possible we do a test and we find out, oh, there's 0 nitrates. Well, I'm pushing enough CO2 now that all those plants are sucking up more nutrients than they used to. Maybe I need to fertilize a little more, right? And maybe it's instead of fertilizing once a week, I need to fertilize twice a week. Or maybe it's I do a little bit of fertilizer every day. I squirt some fertilizer, then I grab my fish food and I feed my fish, right? That's my morning, something like that. In a case of a 90-gallon, what I would say is a 90-gallon with CO2 and some good light. I personally would be dosing, I do some math real fast. I would dose, if you're doing, say, like Easy Green, where it's at 1 pump per 10 gallons, I would be dosing 2 pumps a day. And then on like Wednesday and Saturday, those 2 days, I would dose 4 pumps on those days. Or you could alternate and go 2 pumps, 3 pumps, 2 pumps, 3 pumps. So every other day is 3 pumps. And the days that you're not doing 3 pumps is 2 pumps. Basically what you're looking at is you're trying to do roughly 180 gallons worth of your fertilizer because you're doing CO2 and stronger light. And you might even need a little bit more. You might find that like, hey, I need 3 pumps of this like Nylock G Thrive every day. And that's fine. You're pushing CO2, they're going to absorb more and grow faster, but it's all about how much CO2 you push and watching the plants and looking for algae and just playing a balancing game. You're going to balance these three things together: light, carbon, fertilizer. And once you find it right, tank's going to be amazing. And you're just gonna enjoy it. It might be a little extra maintenance, but hopefully you don't push it too high and make it a ton of maintenance. But you'll find the right balance there, that kind of triangle of power, if you will. And yeah, just don't be afraid to tinker. Don't assume that because like Bentley told you one setting, that's the perfect setting. It's all about slowly tinkering with all of your variables. Try to maybe only adjust one thing at a time, and then as you mess with it and monitor, don't be afraid to play a little bit more and play a little bit more. You're eventually going to find like what's perfect for what your setup is. And once you get there, you're going to love it. All right. I know I had a question from Legion Aquatics. I want to go get to that one. Oh, wait. Nope. That was a question about the drive. Running river stuff. Oh, passion fruit. Do you know if Kenny has bred his banded gudgeons yet? To my knowledge, I don't think he's got them to breed successfully yet, but there's a chance he may have. Legion Aquatics. I saw an older video of Cory growing crypts with no light. Have you ever tried that? So, I've done it in a very different fashion. I've done it where I had so many floating plants that it basically completely shaded the crypts out. And it depends on the crypt, but several crypts are actually much happier in almost no light. Or like shaded light. You can also get this through like very ambient light where say like you have sunlight coming in through a window that's over here and your tank is on the complete other side of the room over here. Right? Some crypts do very well with that. Typically, it's your broader leaf crypts. So like when Daddy Eyes and things like that. Your finer leaf crypts don't necessarily like that stuff. So that's kind of where it is. I mean, from my knowledge, Cory is mostly done when Daddy Eye species and like I think Lucens and Lutea. I don't know how much of it he's done in say like Spiralis or Retrospiralis or some of the finer leaf stuff that's out there outside of like Parva. But then again, I don't know like everything Cory's grown. I just know what he carries in his store, and I know that he's grown all those things, right? Killer Kitty, by the way, thank you for becoming a member. Welcome to Auto Synkless. By the way, Richie, if you haven't already, since you're at Suda McGill, you should see a thing to join the member Discord if you'd like to. It's kind of like the bat phone directly to me. So that's like, if you've ever wanted to like get my attention quickly, being at a level that gets you in the member Discord is how you do it. just letting you know, I pay a lot of attention to the Discord and try to answer it as quickly as I can. Mostly because it's like a trained reaction at this point. Hello, Bentley. Farron is back. Welcome back, Farron. Good to see you, buddy. It's been a few months, hasn't it? Like 6? Does that sound about right? Is my brain functioning correctly for once? I think that's right, isn't it? It's been a while. I know that you've been out, I assume, busy with life, because life does that to folks. Brian Kim, have any suggestions on a good CO2 reactor? Haven't seen many options out there. Good question. So if by reactor you mean like a prefabricated inline reactor or an inline diffuser, the Nylock G1 is really good. So is the one that CO2 Art sells. I think Greenleaf Aquariums has another one that's fairly good. The Nylock G1 you can find on Amazon. In fact, I'll look it up for you. One sec. Nylock G CO2 diffuser. There it is. Get you a little link here. Assuming it wants to function for me. That link in chat is to the Nylock G inline diffuser. I have to say this as a affiliate of Amazon. I do earn a commission on qualified purchases Made through my paid links. Thanks, FTC. Please don't fine me. I can't afford it. I find it amusing that, like, any paid sponsorship or anything like that, you have to be so transparent about it as, like, a small YouTuber. But TV shows can just do whatever the heck they want. I've gone back. So, small side here. And then I'll get back to the second part of answering your question, Brian. But so I have this thing where whenever we sit down for a meal, my lady, brother-in-law James, and I will watch a TV show, and we kind of rotate through people picking a show that we will watch in its entirety. And there's some that I haven't seen before. So an example would be, we finished recently Chuck, which is from early to mid 2010s era, I think. Anyway, they have the most blatant advertisements for Subway sandwiches. And, like, every time something obviously came onto the screen, I would, like, lose my mind because it was so terrible and so blatant that they were, like, forced into this over-the-top, shove-it-down-your-throat level advertising to get whatever sponsorship money they had for that show. And for some of those who may be new, maybe haven't been around as long, I used to work in marketing for a little while. So when I see what I perceive as just terrible marketing because of bad deals, it drives me crazy, because there's much cleverer ways to do that kind of stuff. Or at least less, like, in your face annoying ways. We'll put it that way. So I find it very hilarious that, like, the FTC is so restrictive and or on its toes when it comes to, like, us YouTube monkeys, right? So, like, even like, hey, I have an Amazon affiliate account. I might make 2 pennies if you buy this thing. If I don't say that, they'll fine me 50 grand, right? But a TV show can shove stuff down your throat, and it's just like, yeah, it's fine. Ooh. Anyway, so the second portion of the answer for you, Brian, is, now if you're doing something with, like, say, a sump, and you want a full reactor, there's actually a pretty good DIY video on how to make your own CO2 reactor from my friend Corvus Oskin. Let me see if I can find it. Let's see here. Which version am I looking for? This one. Here it is. And I will link that in chat as well. And I'll give my buddy Joel a little love here with this video, because I actually think a lot of his DIY stuff is super good. But there's a link to that video. It's a way with just some common parts that you can find in a hardware store, and a little bit of like bio balls that you can make your own reactor. So it kind of depends on if you're looking at, like, a sump level and higher levels of CO2. Maybe you're trying to saturate, like, a 200-gallon tank or something. You might want to build, like, one of those really big reactors like that, or there are professional level ones like that if you don't want to build your own, but you'll need something with a little more oomph than, like, an inline reactor, or, say, an atomic diffuser. Hopefully that answers your question there, Brian. Jeff Koski, I just got some new plants for my 75-gallon volcano tank. Got 2 different boost plants, giant hairgrass, and dwarf hairgrass. The dwarf was in bad shape. Hope it pulls through, mostly brown. You know, I've had a lot of struggles with hairgrass in the past. That plant does not seem to ship very well. And the only times I've really had any success with it, when I did try to grow it, was when it came out of a tissue culture, and it was, like, had just been delivered to the store, and I got there the same day they got it. I don't know what it is about that plant. It's very finicky when it comes to being shipped, or at least in my experience it is. Maybe I'm just, like, bad at this stuff. Maybe I'm just bad at hairgrass. Maybe it's a lot like me and Monte Carlo, or Monte Carlo just hates me. Oh man, Paul, you made a DIY lid for a bow front? I'm sorry. You are handier than I am, because there would be no way I could possibly do that. I am so inept when it comes to like DIY projects. I am not handy at all. I am a very much work smarter, not harder mentality. 25 grand fine. Yeah. Yeah, I think it's even more. A lumpy dog. Seahawks Lions this weekend. Somebody got to win. Honestly, we're gonna get into the football realm. I I would be hard pressed, despite the fact that they're my home team, to bet on the Seahawks. I I I just don't. I don't think that we have. I think we were like super emotionally into beating Russell Wilson, and then that's it. I don't think there is this. I mean, all professional athletes are very competitive, but I just don't know that we have the right mixture of things to be successful. We're like, I will give the Lions credit. The Lions have had years and years of ineptitude, but that team loves their coach, and their coach, he may not be like the best coach in the world, but that guy is like so much heart and has those guys so like in his corner that those guys will do a ton for their coach. Now, granted, I know football, for some of you who are not into football, I know you're like, can we get off this and get back to fish? I promise I'll make this short. As Nabokov fan has mentioned, there are a lot of injuries on the Lions. And they have Jared Goff. But we have Geno Smith. and Jamal Adams hurt himself in the very first game of the season. And he's like 50% of our defense. Although I will say, I personally am a fan of Big Al Woods, because that guy has been showing up like an absolute boss. Anyway, we'll get off sports. Back to fish. Anyone who comes to Fishtober Fest, we can talk sports all day long. Oh, man. Jeff Koski. The boosts I got are the Minam Bucephalandra Brownie Phoenix and Minam Bucephalandra Godzilla. So I love Godzilla. Godzilla is one of the ones that I like a lot. I encouraged, what are you? Your aquatic plant factory, aquatic plant lab now, right? Right, Will? If formerly Northwest Aqua Hobby is still here. I encourage him to get Godzilla specifically, because I think, one, it's relatively easy to grow, and two, it's plus it's named so well, but it's a very good looking plant. And it's named so well, so it's inherently like easy to advertise because it has a very distinct name. But I think my biggest problem with like boosts in general is like there's a different name made up for that stuff every other day. So if you have like the right name to start off with, like Skeleton King or Godzilla, right? I think they're a lot more interesting because they just have cool names. So they inherently kind of cause a little chase to them. But I don't know. You could show me like five different boosts that all look the same and they have like wildly different names. And it's one of those things where I'm just like, are they actually different? I think that's a big problem in boosts in general. But yeah, I think you got good choices. Like I like all the brownies in general. The whole brownie family is like really cool plants, and they are usually fairly easy. But I've had brownies melt a ton, so hopefully you don't run into that. And I think usually that has to do with some level of heat. But Godzilla, love Godzilla. That plant is awesome. Awesome. Will Aquatic Arts be at Fishtober Fest? Off the top of my head, I'm not sure. One second. I want to go look at the poster because that could tell me very quickly. I don't see them as one of the sponsors this year, and they were a sponsor last year, which is part of why they brought a bunch of stuff there, but that doesn't mean that they might not be there. Like, I know Dan's Fish is a sponsor, but I don't think he's going to be there. I don't think anybody from Dancefish is coming. Johnny, correct me if I'm wrong. Um, I'm a sponsor of Fishtober Fest. How wild is that? Like, I sponsored this thing. But I did that mostly because they were like, yeah, since you're a speaker, we'll pay for your hotel. And I was like, well, I'm going to spend money anyway. And they were like, well, no, it's fine. Don't worry about it. You know, we got to do something for you. And I'm like, nah. You guys only had all your sponsorship slots fill up? And they're like, actually, we kind of need one. I'm like, cool, I'll be a sponsor. It's the same money I would have spent on a hotel. I'll just sponsor. Don't let my lady hear that. She's probably like, what do you mean? I want to humble brag about my lady for a minute, if you don't mind, and then we'll get back to fish questions. So, my lady started streaming a little while ago. She's at like 3 months now. And most of that's just because it gives her something to do, and it gives her kind of a fun thing that she can do, because she loves gaming, she likes talking to people, so it gives her a social thing. COVID's made it really hard to go out and like see people, right? She's in the top 50 for like growth of channels in her like relatively popular side of things. So her primary thing that she streams is Smash Brothers Ultimate on the Switch, because she plays a lot of Smash Brothers. And there's a lot of people that do that. She's been around for 3 months and she's in like the top 50 for growth, which is kind of crazy, because if you think about it, like fish channels, if you were in the top 50 for growth in a fish channel, you would be doing very, very well. Right? In a sense of somebody like, maybe not MD Fish Tanks level, because he's probably like top 10, right? But you could think about someone like Primetime Aquatics would probably be a good example, or like Irene. Just the rate at which they have grown their channels is probably in like that top 50 range. I'm trying to think who else would be there, but a lot of your folks are like that 100,000-ish mark. You'd probably be talking about those folks. It's pretty wild to think about. All right, more fish stuff. Less random babble, I promise. Here's a good one. Legion Aquatics. What's the lowest light carpeting plant? I know carpet plants like highlight, but is there one that likes really low light besides Parva? Because it takes years. Good question, and tough. So one could argue it can be a carpeting plant. And it's more like the lower end of medium light. It depends on how tall your tank is. And that would be a Nymphaea species called Gardneria santarum. So the cool thing about this plant is it propagates by runners. And it will stay at higher light. It stays very low. At medium and low light, it will send up an occasional runner, but if you clip it, just like any Nymphaea, it'll train itself to stay lower. It'll just build broader leaves to catch the light. But because it propagates via runner, it stays very low and will create a kind of carpet effect, which is very neat and interesting. If you've never seen a like big carpet of Nymphaea, it's a very cool effect. Now, granted, it's higher than what we would think as a traditional carpeting plant. In that regard, I would say you're probably going to look at something like Pygmy Chainsword, which is Halampium tenellum. That's probably the more like traditional carpeting style plant that we would think about. You could also do some of the like mosses that don't need a lot. Like you know how you can break up moss balls, the Cladophora algae, and stick it to substrate and create a carpet type effect. You could do something like that. You could, if you really want to drive yourself crazy, you could use Riccia. I would never use Riccia personally because that stuff's a lot like duckweed. You'll never get rid of it. But those are some of your options. In general, what I would say is that carpets are one of the least natural things out there. Maybe that's personal opinion, but I think like the mixtures of gravels and sand and stuff like that, and some plants that are sparse that come, and then eventually you have just substrate, that's way more natural. Just my 2 cents, but there's some options in there for you. to get my 'tis the season. Geek boy. At least boost names have not gotten as bad as Coral yet. I don't know, dude. Like, at least Coral typically has color differences in its name, but like I've seen, like Hades arrogant blue and stuff like that, and it's like they look no different. So they'll call it like 4 different colors, and none of them look different from each other, right? Or something will be called a tricolor, and it doesn't have 3 different colors. Or it's like this one's a velvet, and this one's a this, and this one's a that, and you look at them, and all 3 of them look exactly the same. It's people just kind of make up names. To me, it's all marketing scheme. And I've kept a bunch of these different plants. And in order to like see some subtle difference, it takes some work. But even then, it's like, well, that has a ever so slightly bluish purple sheen. So does this other one, and so does this other one. Huh? But one's called blue, one's called purple, one's called scarlet. They all look the same. It's kind of obnoxious. Some of them are very distinctly different. Like you'll have original Skeleton King, then you'll have green Skeleton King, and stuff like that. So those have obvious differences. You can also see like there's a lot that have similar plant structure in leaf structure, but you'll see like Silverstein versus black marble, right? They have very different appearances, especially when you get that angle right under light. Of the same light, they look very different. But then there are like the ones that have the Catherine style leaves. I swear none of them have any difference in their color. It drives me insane. It just drives me crazy because it's like these all look the same. And yet I'll buy them because I like them. I'm such a sucker with some of those things. Like, this one says Arrogant Blue. That's kind of a neat name. I don't know. Try it. Does it get blue? No. Well. Nano Aquarium Guy. Bentley, will you try/test the co-op CO2 regulator? I don't know right now. I mean, I'm willing to, certainly. I would have to have a tank. So my biggest problem is that I only have so many tanks, right? And the tanks that need CO2 have it, or I've literally shut my CO2 off to a bunch of tanks recently. I only have 1 tank currently running CO2. Just 1. I no longer have CO2 going into the Guppy Mansion. I've been doing a test on the Running River tank for a while now with no CO2. And I stopped putting CO2 in the Leopoldi Angel tank like a year and a half ago. And it's not because I don't have CO2 or can't afford CO2. Like, although right now CO2 is a pain to get. Apparently there's a CO2 shortage. I have plenty of spare CO2. The busier I've gotten, the more I've tried to reduce the amount of maintenance. So usually that means no CO2, except for the tank that has just a ton of Java fern. Because it doesn't grow that fast, right? And I'm not putting a lot of CO2 in. I'm putting in, I think the 75 long that has the noodles in it gets like 2 bubbles a second of CO2. It gets almost nothing. But yeah. So I do like the tank behind me for CO2 testing. Oh no. I've done CO2 in small tanks. It can be kind of a nightmare. But I would probably, if I could empty a tank out and exchange it for something different, which I'm kind of in the process of doing. I've actually been planning some alterations, but I need to get into probably November before I can do them correctly. There's a story, but I promise I'll get into that at another time. It'll probably end up being a video. But yeah, it depends. It depends on what they get them and what they cost and all those kind of things. Because if they're cost effective compared to some of the other ones, I'll give them a try. But I have very high quality CO2 regulators in my home. So I'm going to be really picky about spending money on other CO2s, if that makes sense. And mostly because I think as long as you do the things you need to, um, you don't need to get them often. You're going to have them go for a long time. Omar, get a giant CO2 tank, run it literally, run it really light. Yeah, so I use a 20-pound tank that runs to a GLA regulator that used to, for a while, run 3 tanks, one at 2 bubbles, another at 2 bubbles, and one at 3 bubbles a second. So you're talking 7 bubbles a second total, and it would run CO2 for 10 hours a day. And that 20-pound tank usually lasted me about 7 months. When I turned off the Leopoldi Angel tank, now it's only going 5, the tanks would run me about 9 to 10 months. I have another 20-pound tank that just sits as a spare, as a just in case. And then I have a 10-pound tank on my 75 long, the one that's got the noodles in it. And I think the last time I filled that was about 8 months ago. It was very early this year. I think it was, it might have been really early January now that I think about it. And it's like at half because I run so little CO2 into the tank, right? And with a good regulator that isn't going to have any issues or leaks, CO2 at a low amount lasts for a very long time, which is very nice. So even if CO2 goes up in price, you're kind of like, meh, I only fill it like once a year. What do I care? Right? So it's not so bad. Legion Aquatics, I'll try to make it to Fishtober Fest. You think I could buy some of that carpeting lily from you? Do me a favor, Legion. Shoot me an email. Or if you're, if you have one of the other ways to contact me, contact me Thursday. Or not Thursday, Wednesday. Wednesday of next week. Okay? Because basically I'm prepping all my plants Thursday night. So I should have a little bit of the carpeting lily that I can give up. I've been regrowing it back out. I don't have a ton of them right now, but I should be able to get you one. And if not, I know some folks that have it, so I might be able to eventually ship you one. But yeah, I would say just, you'll have to remind me, because if I'm grabbing like a single one for a person and you know for a fact you're coming out, my brain will forget, because I've got like a giant checklist of things I have to go down, right? I've got camera gear and this and that and that and that. So there's all those kind of things. But yeah, if you can get in touch with me Wednesday, email is perfectly fine. Just, I'll see the title and it'll remind me. And I'll basically probably just like leave it on my phone so that I know, like, don't forget the lily, right? And then you should be good, because when I package stuff Thursday, I can root around and find you one. Ooh, here's a fun question. What sort of issues have you encountered with CO2 on small tanks? Good question. It's actually very easy to overdose CO2 on a small tank and cause issues for your fish. Because you'll think like, oh, this amount of CO2 doesn't seem like a lot. But then the gallonage is so small that it can impact those fish because they're maybe not used to that CO2 at first, and then you add CO2. So, like, you could put 2 bubbles a second in this little 15-gallon, and it might be too much. Especially if you account for the fact that this is full of crypts, so they're not really using a ton. It might cause a buildup of CO2 gas in the water, more so than would be if I had stems in there. They were really feeding off of it. So that's the biggest thing I've run into. Other than that, like a lot of your small, like the paintball kits and stuff like that, they are just not as well built as a full-size regulator. Like I had an Aquatech, the paintball version that goes on a little paintball tank. And it would gas off when it got low on pressure all the time. And I'm pretty confident I lost a number of cardinal tetras to that. So just the bane of my existence is trying to keep Cardinal Tetris for a long period of time because I'm terrible at it. Had him as a kid, they did fine. As an adult, can't do it. Terrible at it. Also, I haven't dedicated a tank to him, so maybe that's the problem. May it just be user error. The old ID10T, idiot error. Yeah, Legion, that's perfectly fine. Yeah, just shoot me a message, and I'll bring you some, but if not, then I won't grab it. Passionate Fruit. I like it. I like the name. Are Anubias Nana Golden Coin and A Nana Gold different species? Yes. But let me get to the rest. And where can I find both? I'm thinking older golden coin leaves darken while gold stay gold. No. So, this is a good question. Nana Gold doesn't actually get gold, but it has a very like lime green coloration, especially in the newest growth. It has a very light, bright green coloration. And as Bob Purcell was mentioning in chat, there's a bit more point to the leaf. So it has that kind of spade shape, right? Golden Coin has a very dark color, but it has like these almost like perfectly round leaves. They're very, very circular in their shape compared to the Nana Golden. I've kept both. I like both quite a lot. What I will say is that I have seen in Golden Coin, and Golden Coin has nothing to do with color, it's all about the shape. But they like using golden because it sells well. It's marketing. I will note that in the coins, I have seen it more common to be susceptible to Anubias rot. I actually got a recent question about Anubias rot. We might be doing a video on kind of understanding Anubias rot and how to fight it, but not how to cure it, because it's not curable as we know right now. I see it less in Nana Gold, or Golden. I think it's Golden. And that's just because in order to get those shapes, they do a lot of cultivating. So think of it like recessive genes over time in a fish, right? Think of it like when you were doing guppies and we get those really cool lines, but they become really fragile. Similar in Anubias. The more designer we get, the more susceptible they are to problems. But if you want that super bright green, that almost lime green color, totally go for the Golden. It's awesome plant. Relatively stable. I have had very limited problems with it. If you want the cooler leaf shape and lots of smaller leaves, I would either look at the Golden Coin, or if you can find it, find Anubias Bonsai. Bonsai is really awesome. So Bonsai is even smaller than Nana Petite. It has a natural curl to its leaf. It's inherently going to curl over a little bit, so it'll look like it has a calcium deficiency, even when it doesn't. But it grows really compact in its leaf structure, and it will grow like a vine. So if you can place it into wood, you will get these huge amounts of little leaves coming out of it, and it looks incredible. But it's a very slow grower, so it takes a lot of time. I have some chunks that are like this big, hidden away, and literally it's just nothing but leaves. You can barely see the rhizome. You actually have to like peel leaves apart to see the rhizome in the center, because I just float it so they grow leaves everywhere. And it's pretty wild looking. It's a really cool plant. But it can be tough to find, which is the unfortunate part. As far as where to find them, I know that both Golden Coin and Golden Aquarium Co-op carries, and I'm pretty confident anyone who carries a lot of your basic plants will carry both. It's just about what's available from the farms at the time. I think you're going to have probably slightly better with Aquarium Co-op than some of the other places. It's not a very common tissue culture. It's almost always a potted plant because they grow it immersed. But you might also find it from like Dustin's Fish Tanks or a number of different retailers that are out there. I'm sure folks like Boost Plant and some of those other folks have them as well, but I'm inherently going to give a little love to my local person, right? That's just what I do. The only other thing I can think of that would be interesting in a more common, smaller variety, other than the Golden Coin. I have to look this up because I might remember the wrong name, and I don't want to do that. One sec. The problem with when you've grown way too many, and I put this in quotation marks, way too many plants, is you start forgetting which one is which. Because you've grown too many of them together. Of course. Oh yeah, Nangi. I was gonna say Hastifolia, but I know that's the big one. Anubias Nangi is really cool because it has this longer kind of spear-shaped leaf. Not any like the super fancy stuff. We're not going like Pinto, but I like Nangi quite a lot. I have some in brother-in-law James's tank. It's actually been doing really well. It doesn't get. It's kind of like a middle height plant because it has a big long leaf that comes to a nice point. But it's very robust and it doesn't grow super tall. So Nangi's another like, kind of cool one if you're like that leaf shape and leaf texture is more your thing. You can also look at like Coffifolia because it has that cool like ruffled pattern to it. And that's another one of those like if you like leaf textures and you don't care so much about the color being specific, you can look at some of those differences in the Anubias as opposed to some of the more color differentiated Anubias. But they're all awesome. Like honestly, almost every Anubias is amazing. Because there's all these like wonderful little differences in them, and when you put them all together, it's very, very fun because it can create this really cool effect when you have a lot of different Anubiases near each other, but they all have these different colors and leaf textures and all that kind of stuff. It looks really cool. Looks really cool. Oh, orange cones. I want to send some guppy grass. Whoa. To a friend from east to west coast, but I have heard it doesn't survive shipping well. Any tips? So, okay. Guppy grass is fairly fragile in the ship. There's kind of two ways to do it. Way one is to put a ball of it in a little bit of water, and you'll have to like triple bag the dang thing. Right? And leave a lot of air up in the bag. So almost like how you would do a fish, right? But more importantly, you want just ambient air because you want the natural little bits of CO2 to be present along with oxygen. 2, no water in the bag. Take a little paper towel, fold it into something about the size of your palm, and get it lightly wet, not damp, but you can like just dip it into the top of your tank water or siphon a little tank water out, dip it in and squeeze it out so it's just lightly damp, and put that into the bag and put the plant on top of it. That's how I ship a lot of my plants when I have shipped them, because it keeps a little bit of moisture in the bag, but is for the most part open air. And what we're trying to do is help that plant stay humid, but because it has a bunch of atmospheric air around it and not water, it kind of goes into a stable state. It's tough because guppy grass is notorious for being an absolute bear to ship. But those are kind of the two ways to do it. I would lean toward the second version, but the problem is anything that has very fine leaves usually loses a lot of its leaf with that shipping method. But if the stem stays, it will recover as soon as it's brought into a new tank. So there's that. Andrew Hudson, 6-month membership. Hello, Bentley. Hello, all. Hi, Andrew. Good to see you, buddy. Good to have you back. Rocking that blue shrimp. What's up? Oh, man. Bentley, please explain if you can, like I'm a junior high student. What is the benefit or issue of running an airstone or decreasing service agitation when dosing in CO2? All right. Benefit. More oxygen reduces the risk to your fish. More oxygen reduces the chance of an algae outbreak. Using an airstone to increase agitation and natural dissolved oxygen into your water helps your fish, period. There is an assumed negative that the more agitation is present, the more CO2 that you inject into your tank will be off-gassed and lost. That is partially correct. One thing we need to keep in mind is this. There's no injection of CO2 into the water where our plants exist naturally. Most of them are exposed because they grow immersed, so they have foliage above the water. They are exposed to atmospheric CO2. The churn that happens at the top creates gaseous exchange. The natural atmospheric air that we breathe is at least, depending on where you are, sometimes it's higher, but on average, 400 parts per million CO2. That is more CO2 than we can ever put into the water of our aquarium. So when that gas exchange occurs, you are naturally bringing in some amount of CO2. So even though you are potentially losing some CO2 with gas exchange, you are also introducing new CO2 at the same time, along with oxygen. Agitation is fine. Very rarely are you losing so much CO2 that you're now no longer producing enough CO2 for your plants to get their benefit. You would have to have a flow rate and that churn happening at such a rate that it was akin to like a river system to actually off-gas enough CO2 to become problematic. But in that case, your flow rate is probably so high, those plants can no longer stay in place. There you go. Easy peasy. Understanding gas exchange. Maybe I should just do a video on gas exchange. I'm sure there would be some, quote, scientist, unquote, out there who would tell me I was wrong, but I wouldn't care. It's about understanding the basics, right? It's a lot easier to understand simple concepts, even if they're not 100% scientifically perfect, right? It's just how it is, how we humans are programmed. That being said, I hope you all have had a fantastic Tuesday night. Good to see the Matt Aquarius showing up. He's going to be off gas next weekend in Portland. I look forward to having a couple beverages with you, sir, because I didn't get to in Kentucky, but we'll have a few. We'll be on my side of the pond this time. But yeah, guys, thank you so much. I hope you all have a fantastic rest of your week. We'll have another live stream next week, right before. Not sure what we're going to talk about. We'll talk about something. But in general, I hope you all have a fantastic week. Thank you so much for watching. And as always, stay awesome. See you, folks.